the average, everyday, normal New Yorker, human beings.
You know, New York is still one of the most attractive destinations in the world. Just last year, in 2025, the city welcomed 65 million visitors, generating $84.7 billion for the economy and supporting nearly 397,000 jobs. And for 2026, it's projected to rise to 66.3 million visitors. Sounds like it's recovering pretty well, right? But alongside that, there's another reality. As of April 2026, an average of more than 85,600 people are staying in the city's shelter system every single day. In total, around 140,000 people are struggling with housing, including approximately 4,500 people who are still living on the streets.
Why aren't they coming around handing the coats out to the homeless? You know what I mean? What's up with that?
New York is the only city in the United States that is legally required to provide shelter to anyone who asks for it. However, despite that, the image of homelessness remains quite visible in the city's major tourist areas.
I'm not going to have an inhumane city that allows people to live in an inhumane, dangerous environment, no restrooms, no showers, no ways to take care of themselves.
Like I said, as humans, as citizens, Americans, let's help. Let's do something about this.
And coming up soon, the whole world will have its eyes on New York because of the FIFA World Cup 2026. So the big question is, will the city be able to maintain its glamorous, safe, and clean image to welcome millions of visitors? Or is the homelessness issue becoming a sour note that makes many people feel uneasy? What do you think? Let's dive deeper into this situation together, from the real numbers to the direct impact on the tourism industry, and the major challenges ahead as the World Cup approaches. You know, on one side, there are tourists who are willing to spend thousands of dollars for a night stay, and on the other side, well, right there on the sidewalk, more than 140,000 people are looking for a place to sleep each night. A true underground city is existing right in the heart of the most expensive metropolis on the planet. You got it? We're going to talk about why your hotel room is ridiculously expensive and those controversial street sweeping campaigns by the police to protect the city's image in front of the international cameras. Step into Midtown or the subway system, and you're immediately operating in a shared space where visitors and the city's most vulnerable collide, often within seconds. You'll see it. People sleeping across benches, asking for cash, talking to themselves, sometimes clearly in distress. This isn't rare. It's part of the daily flow. Head up to Times Square after dark, and the bright lights can't hide the bodies lined up on the sidewalks or the aggressive panhandlers shoving cups in tourists' faces. That visible disorder is the first thing international visitors notice, and it sticks. As of the 2025-2026 period, homelessness in New York City has reached its highest level in decades, reflecting a systemic and increasingly complex social crisis. Each night, more than 85.6 people live in the city's shelter system. Notably, the majority are not single individuals living on the streets, but families with children, highlighting the scale and severity of the issue. Although the city enforces the right to shelter policy, a legal obligation to provide housing for homeless individuals, which helps reduce the number of people sleeping outdoors, the shelter system remains consistently overcrowded and unable to meet long-term needs. In recent years, the number of homeless individuals in NYC has risen sharply due to multiple factors, including soaring housing costs, a shortage of affordable housing, and the influx of migrants since 2022. In addition, thousands of people still choose to live on the streets or within the subway system due to concerns about conditions in shelters. The city has implemented various programs such as Homestat to directly engage with unsheltered individuals, as well as subway safety initiatives aimed at transitioning them into stable housing. However, despite substantial spending on homeless services, amounting to tens of thousands of dollars per person annually, the effectiveness remains widely debated as the number of homeless individuals has not shown a clear decline. This reality underscores that homelessness in New York is not merely a matter of lacking shelter, but also involves access to services, the quality of support, and the broader economic and social pressures of modern urban life. Bottom line, NYC still delivers, but the experience has changed. It's faster, sharper, and less predictable. You're not just navigating attractions anymore, you're navigating the city itself. Tourism doesn't just reshape the skyline of New York City, it quietly reshapes who gets to live in it. Here's the uncomfortable question. When a city gets richer from visitors, who exactly gets priced out of survival? As hotel rates push past $300 a night and short-term rentals compete with long-term housing, landlords follow the money fast. Consequently, rents spike, vacancy rates stay brutally low, and working-class residents get squeezed out with almost no buffer. This isn't abstract economics, it's street-level math. If your paycheck doesn't scale with rent, you're on a countdown, miss one payment, then another, and you're out. No safety net, no reset. At the same time, tourism-driven development accelerates gentrification block by block. Old neighborhoods flip into high-margin zones. Boutique hotels, luxury condos, retail chains, and longtime residents lose ground. As a result, displacement isn't gradual, it's aggressive. One lease ends, the price doubles, and suddenly you're commuting from farther out, or you're not housed at all. The same dollars that power the city's tourism boom can also fuel the pipeline into homelessness, just in reverse direction. Meanwhile, the system reacts, but mostly downstream. Shelters absorb the overflow, transit hubs become temporary refuge, and outreach teams try to stabilize people already in crisis. However, none of that changes the upstream pressure, rising costs tied directly to a tourism-heavy economy. In short, tourism growth, price inflation, housing, instability, homelessness, it's a tight loop, and right now, the pressure is one-sided. And it gets tighter, because once you fall out of the housing market here, re-entry is brutally difficult. Credit drops, savings vanish, and even low-tier apartments demand income thresholds that most displaced residents simply can't hit. So instead of bouncing back, people cycle shelter, temporary work, street, repeat. Meanwhile, high-traffic tourist zones keep expanding, pulling investment inward and pushing vulnerability outward. The result is a city split in layers, high-value zones optimized for visitors, and survival zones where stability keeps eroding. That's not accidental, it's structural. Major events don't just bring crowds. They compress the entire city system under pressure, fast and unforgiving. Here's the real question. When 1.2 million visitors hit the New York, New Jersey region during the FIFA World Cup 2026, who absorbs the shock at street level? On paper, the upside is massive. Matches at MetLife Stadium from June 11 to the 19th of July 2026, combined with America 250 events, are projected to generate about $3.3 billion and support roughly 26,000 jobs. That's the headline. But step outside the headline, and the load shifts immediately to housing, transit, policing, and critically, the edges of the system where homelessness sits. Now, layer in reality. Fan zones at USTA Billie Jean King National Tennis Center and Rockefeller Center will concentrate traffic, money, and visibility. Consequently, visible homelessness doesn't disappear. It collides with peak tourist flow. Meanwhile, hotel bookings tied to the World Cup are tracking about 2% lower than 2025 projections, which signals uneven demand and pricing volatility. At the same time, the New York City Police Department has to stretch resources across crowd control, transit hubs, and high-profile sites, diluting coverage elsewhere. Add to that a city decision to limit permits for other events from May 24 to the 25th of July 2026, effectively clearing the calendar to prioritize the tournament. Less noise, more control, but also fewer alternative revenue streams for smaller operators. When the city cleans up for a global event, where do the displaced people actually go? Operationally, you'll see increased outreach teams and targeted sweeps in core tourist corridors. In parallel, the New York City Council introduced measures in April 2026 to support small businesses and expand public restrooms, practical fixes aimed at managing foot traffic and sanitation under surge conditions. However, these are downstream adjustments. Upstream pressure, high rents, tight vacancies, and a tourism-heavy demand spike remains unchanged. So the mechanics are blunt. Mega event demand surge, price pressure, resource diversion, visibility management. It's efficient for optics, not for root causes. And if you're tracking this like an insider, the takeaway is simple. During peak events, the city optimizes for flow and perception, while the underlying housing stress keeps compounding in the background. Security in New York City isn't just about safety. It's about control, pressure, and who gets to stay visible. Walk into any major subway hub or tourist corridor right now, and you'll notice the shift immediately. More officers, more surveillance, tighter movement. When a city increases security, is it protecting people or managing what people are allowed to see? Because on the ground, enforcement doesn't happen evenly. It concentrates where money flows. As a result, high traffic zones, Times Square, Midtown, transit lines are heavily monitored and actively stabilized. Outreach teams, police units, and transit staff coordinate to move unhoused individuals out of sightlines and into shelters. However, this isn't a clean fix. It's a constant cycle. Relocate, reappear, repeat. Meanwhile, the city leans on policies like right to shelter, which on paper guarantees a bed. But in practice, that system is stretched, crowded, and often unstable for long-term recovery. What happens when safety for one group quietly translates into displacement for another? Because increased policing doesn't eliminate homelessness. It redistributes it. People get pushed from high-value zones into less visible edges, outer boroughs, late-night subway cars, under-monitored blocks. And at street level, that creates a fragmented map of survival, controlled zones versus pressure zones. Furthermore, from an insider standpoint, the numbers tell the story. Response times, patrol density, shelter intake rates, they all spike in areas tied to tourism revenue. That's not coincidence, that's prioritization. Consequently, urban management becomes a balancing act between optics and reality. Protect the image, maintain flow, reduce friction, but the trade-off is clear. The system manages visibility more efficiently than it solves root causes. And it goes deeper, because once enforcement tightens in one zone, pressure transfers instantly, like fluid under constraint. You clear one subway line, the population shifts to another. You stabilize one district, adjacent blocks absorb the overflow. There's no vacuum here, only redistribution. At the same time, compliance becomes survival. If you accept shelter placement, you get temporary stability, but often under strict rules. Curfews, shared space, limited autonomy. If you refuse, you stay mobile, but exposed, weather, enforcement sweeps, constant displacement. Moreover, timing matters. Late night hours, low patrol density zones, end-of-line subway stations, these become micro-habitats for survival. People adapt fast, mapping the city based on enforcement patterns, not geography. And that's the hard truth. The system isn't just reacting to homelessness, it's shaping how homelessness exists. Structured, contained, but not resolved. The system in New York City doesn't break, it loops. Tourism drives revenue, revenue drives prices, prices drive displacement. Displacement feeds homelessness, and then the city doubles down on security to protect the very flow that started it. That's the cycle. What if the same engine that powers the city's global appeal is also quietly producing its most visible crisis? Because on the ground, that's exactly how it plays out. Fast, measurable, and unforgiving. Start with the input. Millions of visitors, high daily spend, constant demand. As that demand scales, landlords optimize, short-term over long-term, high yield over stability. Consequently, rents climb, vacancy compresses, and entry barriers harden. Then the squeeze hits. Working residents with flat wages lose margin. One missed check becomes two. Eviction risk spikes. From there, the transition is brutally linear. Doubled up living couch rotations, shelter intake, street exposure. No buffer, no pause. Meanwhile, tourism doesn't slow, it intensifies. Now layer insecurity. To maintain flow, foot traffic, transit reliability, visitor confidence, the city increases patrol density and visibility in high-value zones. Therefore, enforcement concentrates where revenue concentrates. Outreach teams move people into shelters. Officers clear choke points. Transit staff manage platforms. However, removal isn't resolution, it's redistribution. People shift to edges, outer boroughs, late-night routes, low-visibility corridors. If the problem keeps moving but never shrinking, is it being solved or just managed more efficiently? At the same time, policy tries to absorb the impact. The right to shelter guarantee pulls thousands indoors each night, stabilizing the optics and reducing exposure. But capacity isn't the same as recovery. Shelters cycle people through short stays, strict rules, limited privacy. So even when someone enters the system, long-term exit rates lag. In parallel, upstream pressure, rent inflation tied to a tourism-heavy economy, keeps feeding new entrants into that same system. Input rises faster than output. The math doesn't balance. Furthermore, timing and geography reveal the mechanics. Peak tourist hours bring maximum enforcement and minimum visibility of homelessness in core zones. Off-peak hours flip that, subway endpoints, under-patrolled blocks, and transitional spaces become survival nodes. Individuals adapt, mapping the city by enforcement intensity, not neighborhoods. It's dynamic, responsive, and constant. Put it together and the loop tightens. Tourism growth, price inflation, housing instability, homelessness, intensified security, spatial redistribution, preserved tourism flow, further growth, each step reinforces the next. From an insider view, it's not chaotic, it's structured. The city protects movement and revenue first. Everything else adjusts around that priority. And until the upstream drivers, housing cost and supply, are recalibrated, the loop holds. At this point, homelessness in New York City isn't just a social issue, it's a stress test of how a global city chooses to operate under pressure. The data, the street patterns, and the policy responses all point in the same direction. The system is managing outcomes, not fixing causes. Tourism keeps the economy running, security keeps the system stable, but neither directly addresses the root driver, access to affordable, stable housing. So the real question isn't whether New York can remain a top destination. It will. The question is, at what cost and for whom? Because right now, the city is balancing two realities that don't fully align. On one side, a polished, high-efficiency urban machine built for movement, spending, and global attention. On the other, a growing population navigating survival inside that same system, often pushed to its margins. And this isn't just New York. Cities like Los Angeles, London, even parts of Tokyo are facing similar pressure points, just at different scales and visibility levels. Which raises a bigger issue. Is this the new model of global cities, optimized for visitors, while pushing instability outward? If so, then homelessness isn't a side effect anymore. It's part of the system itself.